Now we've got an extraordinary group of good managers, which is why we can manage by abdication. It wouldn't work if we had a whole bunch of people who were had come with the idea of getting my job. I mean, if we had 50 people out there, all of whom wanted to be running Berkshire Hathaway, it would not work very well. But they have the jobs they want in life. Tony Nicely loves running Geico. And you go down the line, they have jobs they love, and that's a lot better in my view than having a whole bunch of them out there that are kind of doing their job there, kind of hoping the guy that's competing with them will fail, so that when I'm not around, that they'll get the nod. It's a much different system than exists at most large American corporations. Charlie, got any? Well, we'll go to station 8.
Hi, Warren and Charlie. My name is Vicky Wei. I'm an MBA student from the Wharton School of Business. This is my first time to be in the annual meeting. I'm really excited about it. Thanks for having us here.
Thanks for coming.
My question is, where do you want to go fishing for the next 3 to 5 years? Which sectors are you most bullish on, and which sectors are you most bearish on? Thank you.
Yeah, Charlie and I do not really discuss sectors much, nor do we let the macro environment or thoughts about it enter into our decision. We're really opportunistic, and we obviously are looking at all kinds of businesses all the time. I mean, it's a hobby with us almost, probably more with me than Charlie. But we're hoping we get a call, and we've got a bunch of fillers, and I would say this is true of both of us. We probably know in the first 5 minutes or less whether something is likely to or has a reasonable chance of happening. And it's just going to go through there, and it's going to, the first question is can we really ever know enough about this to come to a decision? And that knocks out a whole bunch of things, and there's a few, and then if it makes it through there, there's a pretty good reasonable chance we may do something. But it's not sector specific. We do love the companies, obviously, with the moats around the product, where consumer behavior can be perhaps predicted further out. But I would say it's getting harder for us anyway, to anticipate consumer behavior than we might have thought 20 or 30 years ago. I think that's just a tougher game now. But we'll measure it, and we'll look at it in terms of returns on present capital, returns on prospective capital. A lot of people give you some signals as to what kind of people they are, even in talking in the first 5 minutes, and whether you're likely to actually have a satisfactory arrangement with them over time. So a lot of things go on fast, but we know the kind of sectors we kind of like to, or the type of business we kind of like to end up in, but we don't really say we're going to go after companies in this field or that field or another field. Charlie, you want to?
Yeah, some of our subsidiaries do little bolt-on acquisitions that make sense, and that's going on all the time. And of course we like it. But I would say the general field of buying whole companies, it's gotten very competitive. There's a huge industry of doing these leveraged buyouts. That's what I still call them. The people who do them think that's a kind of a bad marker, so they say they do private equity. It's like even a janitor call himself the chief of engineering or something. But at any rate, the people who do the leveraged buyouts, they can finance practically anything in about a week or so through shadow banking, and they can pay very high prices and get very good terms and so on. So it's very, very hard to buy businesses, and we've done well because there's a certain small group of people that don't want to sell to private equity. And they love the business so much they don't want to just dressed up for resale.
We had a guy some years ago came to see me, and he was 61 at the time, and he said, "Look, I've got a fine business. I got all the money I can possibly need, but," he said, "there's only one thing that worries me when I drive to work." Actually, there's more than one guy that's told me that's used the same term. He said, "There's only one thing that bothers me when I go to work. If something happens to me today, my wife's left. I've seen these cases where executives in the company try to buy them out cheap, or they sell to a competitor and all the people." He says, "I don't want to leave her with a business. I want to decide where it goes, but I want to keep running it. And I love it." And he said, "I thought about selling it to a competitor, but if I sell it to a competitor, their CFO is going to become the CFO of the new company, and they're, on down the line. And all these people who helped me build the business, a lot of them are going to get dumped, and I'll walk away with a ton of money, and some of them will lose their job." He said, "I don't want to do that." And he said, "I can sell it to a leveraged buyout firm who would prefer to call themselves private equity, but they're going to leverage it to the hilt, and they're going to resell it, and they're going to dress it up some, but in the end, it's not going to be in the same place. I don't know where it's going to go." He said, "I don't want to do that." So he said, "It isn't because you're so special." He says, "There just isn't anyone else." If you're ever proposing to a potential spouse, don't use that line. But that's what he told me, and I took it well, and we made a deal. Logically, unless somebody has that attitude, we should lose in this market. You can borrow so much money so cheap, and we're looking at the money as pretty much all equity capital, and we're not competitive with somebody that's going to have a very significant portion of the purchase price carried in debt, maybe averaging 4% or something.
And he won't take the losses if it goes down. He gets part of the profit if it goes up.
Yeah, his calculus is just so different than ours, and he's got the money to make the deal. So if all you care about is getting the highest price for your business, we are not a good call. And we will get some calls in any event, and we can offer something that wouldn't call it unique, but it's unusual. The person that sold us that business, and a couple of others that actually, it's almost word for word the same thing they say. They are all happy with the sale they made, very happy, and they have lots and lots and lots of money, and they're doing what they love doing, which is still running the business, and they know that they made a decision that will leave their family and the people who work with them all their lives in the best possible position. And that's, in their equation, they have done what's best. But that is not the equation of many people, and it certainly isn't the equation of somebody who buys it and borrows every dime they can with the idea of reselling it after they maybe dress up the accounting and do some other things. And but when the disparity gets so wide between what a heavily debt financed purchase will bring as against an equity type purchase, it gets to be tougher. There's just no question about it, and it'll stay that way.
But it's been tough for a long time, and we've bought some good businesses.
Yeah. Okay, Andrew?
Warren, this comes from a shareholder who I think is here, who asked to remain anonymous, writes, 3 years ago, you were asked at the meeting about how you thought we should compensate your successor. You said it was a good question, and you would address it in the next annual letter. We've been patiently waiting. Can you tell us now, at least philosophically, how you've been thinking about the way the company should compensate your successor so we don't have to worry when the pay consultants arrive on the scene?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, at my age, I don't have to worry about things I said 3 years ago, but this guy, obviously much younger, and remembers. I'll accept his word that I said that. There's a couple possibilities, actually. And I don't want to get into details on them, but you may have, and I actually would hope that we would have somebody, A, that's already very rich, which they should be, if they've been working a long time and have got that kind of ability, that's very rich and really is not motivated by whether they have 10 times as much money as they and the families can need or 100 times as much. And they might even wish to perhaps set an example by engaging for something far lower than actually what you could say their true market value is. And that could or could not happen. I think it'd be terrific if it did, but I can't blame anybody for wanting their market value. And then if they didn't elect to go in that direction, I would say that you would probably pay them a very modest amount and then have an option which increased in value or increased in striking price annually. Nobody does this hardly. The Graham Holdings has done it. The Washington Post Company did a little bit, but would increase because, assuming that there were substantial retained earnings every year, because why should somebody retain a bunch of earnings and then claim they'd actually improve the value simply because they withheld the money from shareholders? So it's very easy to design that, and in private companies, people do design it that way. They just don't want to do it in public companies because they get more money the other way. But they might have a very substantial one that could be exercised, but where the shares had to be held for a couple of years after retirement, so that they really got the result over time that the majority of the stockholders would be able to get and not be able to pick their spots as to when they exercised and sold a lot of stock. It's not hard to design, and it really depends who you're dealing with in terms of actually how much they care about money and having money beyond what they can possibly use. And most people do have an interest in that, and I don't blame them. But I don't know. What do you think, Charlie?
Well, one thing I think is that I have avoided all my life compensation consultants. To me, it's I hardly can find the words to express my contempt.
I will say this: if the board hires a compensation consultant after I go, I will come back. Mad.
So I think there's a lot of mumbo jumbo in this field, and I don't see it going away.
Oh, it isn't going to go away.
Yeah.
No, it's going to get worse. I mean, if you look at, the way compensation gets handled, everybody looks at everybody else's proxy statement and says we can't possibly hire a guy that isn't the.
It's ridiculous.
So on, and the human relations department, work for the CEO, come in and suggest a consultant. What consultant is ever going to get another assignment if he says you should pay your CEO below down in the fourth quartile because you're getting a fourth quartile result? I mean, it just, it isn't that the people are evil or anything. It's just the nature of the situation. It produces a result that is not consistent with how representatives of the owners should behave.
It's even worse than that. Capitalism is the golden goose that we all live on, and if people generally get so they have contempt for it because they don't like the pay arrangements and the system, your capitalism may not last as well, and that's like killing the golden goose. So I think the existing system has a lot wrong with it.
I think there is something coming in pretty soon. I may be wrong about this, where companies are going to have to put in their proxy statement the CEO's pay to the average pay or something like that. That isn't going to change anything. I mean,
it won't change a thing.
It won't change a thing, and it'll cost us.
By the way, it won't get any headlines either. It'll be tucked away.
It'll cost us a lot of money, with 367,000 people employed around the world, and I mean, we'll hope to get something that makes it somewhat simpler so we can use estimates or something of the sort. But to get the median income or whatever, however the rules may read, and
that's what consultants are for, Warren.
Yeah, it's it is human nature that produces this, and the most I write in this letter to the managers every 2 years. I said the only excuse I won't take on something is that everybody else is doing it. But of course, everybody else is doing it is exactly the rationale for why people did not want to count the cost of stock options as a cost. I mean, it was ridiculous. All these CEOs went to Washington. They got the Senate, I think, to vote 88-9 to say that stock options aren't a cost. And then a few years later, that it became so obvious that they finally put it in, so it was a cost. It reminded me of Galileo or something. I mean, all these guys.
Worse. It was way worse. The Pope behaved better to Galileo than he was.
Well, anyway, I would hope, like I say, somebody, whoever, and it doesn't even have to be, I'm not talking about the current successor or anybody else. I mean, these successors down the line are probably going to have gotten very, very wealthy by the time they're running Berkshire, and the incremental value of wealth gets very close to zero at some point, and there is a chance to use it as a different sort of model. But I don't have any problem if a system is devised that recognizes retained earnings. I've never heard anybody talk about it. At the 20 boards I've been on, or if you and I were partners in a business, and we kept retaining earnings in the business, and I kept having the value to buy a portion of you out at a constant price, you'd say this is idiocy. But of course, that's the way all the option systems are designed, and it's better to be for the CEO and for the consultants, and of course, usually if there's some correlation between what CEOs are paid and what boards are paid. If CEOs were getting paid at the rate that they got paid 50 years ago, adapted to present dollars, director pay would be lower. So it's got all these built-in things that, to some extent, sort of kindle the.
No Berkshire director is in it for the money.
Well, they are. They own a lot of stock. And they bought it in the market, just like the shareholder did.
It's a very old-fashioned system.
I looked at one company the other day, and 7 of the directors had never bought a share of stock with their own money. Now, they've been given stock, but not one of the. I mean, I didn't say not one. 7 of the directors had never actually bought a share of stock, and there they are, making decisions on who should be CEO and how they should be paid and all that sort of thing. But they've never felt like shelling out a dollar themselves. Now they've been given a lot of stock. It's, we're dealing with human nature here, folks. And that what you want is to have a system that works well in spite of how human nature is going to drive it. And we've done awfully well in this country in that respect. I mean, American businesses overall has done very, very well for the Americans generally. But not every aspect of it is exactly what you want to teach your kids. Okay, Greg?
Warren, between 2010 and 2015, intermodal rail traffic enjoyed double-digit rates of revenue growth as shorter-haul freight converted from truck to rail. During the past year or so, though, cheaper diesel prices and more readily available truckload capacity have made trucking more competitive, leading to a decline in intermodal rail traffic. While carload growth is expected to be solid longer term, helping to offset weakness in other segments like coal, what impact do you expect the widening of the Panama Canal, which was completed last year, to have on the West Coast port shipments that BNSF has traditionally carried through to exchange points for the eastern U.S. railroads, as shippers elect to have goods unloaded at ports in the Gulf of Mexico or up the eastern seaboard? And while a loss of volumes is never a good thing, could there be a small trade-off here as the bottleneck in Chicago, where most east-west cargo is handed off, eases a bit over time as some of the current traffic gets rerouted?
Well, Chicago has got lots of problems, and it's going to continue for a long. I mean, that requires a big solution. When you think of how the railroads developed, I mean, Chicago was the center, and you laid the rails, and there were a whole bunch of different railroads, 100 years ago, and city grows up around them and everything. So Chicago can be a huge problem. But getting to intermodal, I think intermodal will do very well. But you are correct that car loadings actually hit a peak in 2006. So here we are 11 years later. And the investment of the 5 big Class 1 railroads, 4 of the biggest, if you look at their investment beyond depreciation, it's tens and tens of billions of dollars, and we're carrying less freight, the 4 in aggregate, than we were in 2006. And coal will continue to decrease. It's a good business, and it has big advantages over truck in many respects. Truck gets much more of a free ride in terms of the fact that their right-of-way, which is the highway system, is subsidized to a much greater degree beyond the gas tax, than the railroad industry. But it has not been a growth business in physical volume to any great degree. I think it's unlikely to be. I think it's likely to be a good business. I think we've got a great territory. I like the West better than the East, and as you mentioned, there will be some intermodal traffic that gets diverted to eastern ports, perhaps, or so on. Overall, we've got a terrific system in that respect, and we will do well. It would be more fun if we had something where you could expect aggregate car loadings to increase 2 or 3 or 4% a year, but I don't think that's going to happen. I do think our fundamental position is terrific. However, I think we'll earn decent returns on capital, but I think that's the limit of it. Charlie?
Nothing to add.
Okay, station 9.
I'm from Shankar Anand from Gurnee, Illinois. Thank you for doing everything you do for us. I have a question. The two of you have largely avoided capital allocation mistakes by bouncing ideas off of one another. Will this continue long into Berkshire's future? And I'm interested in both at headquarters and at subsidiaries.
It can't continue very long.
Don't get defeatist, Charlie. Any successor that's put in at Berkshire, capital allocation abilities and proven capital allocation abilities are certain to be uppermost in the board's minds, or in the current case, in terms of my recommendation, Charlie's recommendation, for what happens after we're not around. Capital allocation is incredibly important at Berkshire. Right now we have 280 or 90 billion, whatever it may be, of shareholders' equity. If you take the next decade alone, nobody can make accurate predictions on this, but in the next 10 years, if you just take and depreciation right now is another $7 billion a year, something on that order. The next manager in the decade is going to have to allocate maybe $400 billion or something like that, maybe more, and it's more than already has been put in. So 10 years from now, Berkshire will be an aggregation of businesses where more money has been put in that decade than everything that took place ahead of time. So you need a very sensible capital allocator in the job of being CEO of Berkshire, and we will have one. It would be a terrible mistake to have someone in this job where really capital allocation might even be their main talent. It probably should be very close to their main talent. And of course, we have an advantage at Berkshire in that we do know how important that is, and there is that focus on it. And in a great many companies, people get to the top through ability and sales. Sometimes they come from the legal side, sometimes all different sides. And they then have the capital allocation sort of in their hands. Now, they may not establish strategic thinking divisions, and they may listen to investment bankers and everything, but they better be able to do it themselves. And if they've come from a different background or haven't done it, it's a little bit, as I put in one of my letters, I think it's like getting to Carnegie Hall, playing the violin, and then you walk out on the stage and they hand you a piano. I mean, it is something that Berkshire would not do well if somebody was put in who had a lot of skills in other areas, but really did not have an ability of capital allocation. I've talked about it as being something I call a money mind. I mean, people can have 120 IQs or 140 IQs or whatever it may be, very similar scoring abilities in terms of intelligence tests, and some of them have minds that are good at one type of thing and some of them another. I've known very bright people that do not have money minds, and they can make very unintelligent decisions. They can do all kinds of other things that most mortals can't do, but it just isn't the way their wiring works. And I've known other people that really would not do that brilliantly. They do fine, but on an SAT test or something like that. But they've never made a dumb money decision in their life. And Charlie, I'm sure, has seen the same thing. So we do want somebody, and hopefully they've got a lot of talents, but we certainly do not want somebody that, if they lack a money mind. Charlie?
Well, there's also the option of buying in stock, so it isn't like it's some hopeless problem. One way or another, something intelligent will be done.
And a money mind will recognize when it makes sense to buy in stock and doesn't. And in fact, it's a pretty good test for some people in terms of management, how they think about something like buying in stock, because it's not a very complicated equation if you sort of think straight about that sort of a subject. But some people think that way and some don't, and they're probably miles better at something else. But they say some very silly things when you get to something that seems so clear as whether, say, buying in stock makes sense. Anything further, Charlie?
No.
Okay, Carol.
This question comes from Steve Haberstroh of Connecticut. Warren, you've made it very clear in your annual letter that you think the hedge fund compensation scheme of 2 and 20 generally does not work well for the fund's investors. And in the past, you have questioned whether investors should pay, quote, financial helpers, unquote, as much as they can. But financial helpers can create tremendous value for those they help. Take Charlie Munger, for instance. In nearly every annual letter and on the movie this morning, you describe how valuable Charlie's advice and counsel has been to you, and in turn to the incredible rise in Berkshire's value over time. Given that, would you be willing to pay the industry standard, quote, financial helper fee of 1% on assets to Charlie? Or would you perhaps even consider 2 and 20 for him? What is your judgment about this matter?
Yeah. Well, I've said in the annual report that I've known maybe a dozen people in my life. And I said there are undoubtedly hundreds or maybe thousands out there, but I've said that I've known personally a dozen where I would have predicted, or did predict, in a fair number of those 12 cases, I did predict that the person involved would do better than average in investing over a long period of time. And obviously, Charlie is one of those people. So would I pay him? Sure. But would I take financial advisors as a group and pay them 1% with the idea that they would deliver results to me that were better than the S&P 500 by 1%, and thereby leave me breaking even against what I could have done on my own? There's very few. So it's just not a good question to ask whether, I pay Charlie 1%. That's like asking, whether I'd have paid Babe Ruth, 100,000 or whatever it was to come over from the Red Sox to the Yankees. I mean, sure it would have, but there weren't very many people I would have paid 100,000 to in 1919 or whatever it was to come over to the Yankees. So it's a fascinating situation because the problem isn't that the advisors are going to do so terrible. It's just that you have an option available that doesn't cost you anything that is going to do better than they are in aggregate. And it's an interesting question. I mean, if you hire an obstetrician, assuming you need one, they're going to do a better job of delivering the baby than, if the spouse comes in to do it, or if they just pick somebody up off the street. And if you go to a dentist, if you hire a plumber, in all the professions, there is value added by the professionals as a group compared to doing it yourself or just randomly picking laymen. In the investment world, it isn't true. I mean, the active group, the people that are professionals in aggregate, cannot do better than the aggregate of the people who just sit tight. And if you say, well, in the active group, there's some person that's terrific, I will agree with you. But the passive people can't all pick that person, and they don't know how to identify him. So
it's even worse than that. The expert who's really good, when he gets more and more money in, he suffers just terrible performance problems.
Yeah.
And so you'll find the person who has a long career at 2 and 20, and if you analyze it, net all the people have lost money because some of the early people have had a good record, but more money come in later and they lose it. So the investing world is it's a morass of wrong incentives, crazy reporting, and I'd say a fair amount of delusion.
Yeah, if you ask me whether those 12 people I picked would do better than the S&P working with $100 billion, I would answer that probably none of them would. I mean, that would not be their prospective performance. But when I was talking of them, or referencing them, and when they actually worked in practice, they dealt generally with pretty moderate sums. And as the sums grew, their relative advantage diminished. I mean, it's so obvious from history. The example I used in the report, I mean, the guy who made the bet with me, and incidentally, all kinds of people didn't make the bet with me because they knew better than to make the bet with me. There were hundreds, at least a couple hundred underlying hedge funds. These guys were incented to do well. The fund-to-fund manager was incented to pick the best ones they could pick. The guy who made the bet with me was incented to pick the best fund-to-funds. And tons of money, and just with those 5 funds, a lot of money went to pay managers for what was subnormal performance over a long period of time. And it can't be anything but that. And it's an interesting profession when you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who are compensated based on selling something that in aggregate can't be true, superior performance. So, but it'll continue, and the best salespeople will tend to attract the most money, and because it's such a big game, people will make huge sums of money, far beyond what they're going to make in medicine or you name it. I mean, repairing the country's infrastructure. I mean, the big money, huge money, is in selling people the idea that you can do something magical for them. And if you even have $1 billion fund, and get 2% of it for terrible performance, that's $20 million. In any other field, it would just blow your mind. But people get so used to it, in the field of investment, that it just sort of passes along. And $10 billion, I mean, $200 million fees. We've got 2 guys in the office, that are managing $11 billion. Well, no, they're not. I'm sorry. They're managing $20 billion. Between the two of them, $21 billion maybe. We pay them $1 million a year, plus the amount by which they beat the S&P. They have to actually do something to get contingent compensation, which is much more reasonable than 20%. But how many hedge fund managers in the last 40 years have said, I only want to get paid if I do something for you? Unless I actually deliver something beyond what you can get yourself, I don't want to get paid. It just doesn't happen. And it gets back to that line that I've used. But when I asked the guy, how can you, in good conscience, charge 2 and 20? And he said, because I can't get 3 and 30. Any more, Charlie, or are we used up our...
I think you've beaten up on them enough.
Yeah, well. Jonathan.
Precision Cast Parts represents the second largest acquisition Berkshire has ever made. There wasn't much qualitative or quantitative information about it in the 2016 annual. Would you be willing to update us here with how it is doing currently, what excites you about its prospects, and what worries you most about it? I'm also curious if there were any meaningful purchase price adjustments beyond intangible amortization that negatively impacted Precision's earnings in 2016, as was the case with Van Tile in 2015. And finally, are there any opportunities in sight for bolt-on acquisitions?
Yeah, we've actually made acquisitions, and we'll make more that fit there because we've got an extraordinary manager, and we've got a terrific position in the aircraft field. So there will be the chance for sensible acquisitions, and we've already made 2 anyway, and we will make more over time. The amortization of intangibles is the only big purchase price adjustment. That's something over $400 million a year, non-deductible. In my mind, that's 400 and some million of earnings. I do not regard the economic goodwill of Precision Cast Parts being diminished at that rate annually. That is and I've explained that in some degree. As a very long-term business, you can worry about 3D printing. I don't think you have to worry about aircrafts being manufactured. But aircraft deliveries can be substantially altered in relation to any given backlog in most cases. So the deliveries can be fairly volatile, but I don't think the long-term demand is anything I worry about. And the question is whether anybody can do it better or cheaper, or like I say, whether 3D printing at least takes away part of the field in some respect. But overall, I will tell you, I feel very good about Precision Cast Parts. It is a very long-term business. I mean, we have contracts that run for a very long time, and like I say, the initiation of a new plane may be delayed or something of the sort. But if you take a look at the engine that's in the other adjoining room here and in our exhibition hall, you would, if you were putting that engine together with a 20 or 25-year life or whatever it may have, carrying hundreds of people, you would care very much about your supplier, and you'd care not only in the quality, which would be absolutely, you'd care of the work being done, but you also, if you were an engine manufacturer or an aircraft manufacturer further down the line, you would care very much about the reliability of delivery on something, because you do not want a plane that, or an engine, is 99% complete while somebody is dealing with the problem of faulty parts or anything else that would delay delivery. So the reliability is incredibly important, and don't think anybody has a reputation better than Mark Donegan and the company for delivery. So I love the fact we bought Precision Gas Parts. Charlie?
Yeah, well, what's interesting about it, too, is that it's a very good business purchased at a fair price but this is no screaming bargain like the old days.
No.
For quality businesses, you pay up now a lot more than we used to.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And you don't get a bargain price. The 400+ million, incidentally, goes on for quite a while too. And we'll explain it in the report, just as we'll explain that the depreciation charge at a railroad would not be adequate. I mean, it's the way accounting works. And starting, I don't even want to tell you about this one, but starting the first of next year, accounting is going to become sort of a nightmare in terms of Berkshire and other companies, because they're going to have us mark our equities to market, just like we were a Wall Street trading firm or something. And those changes in the value of Coca-Cola or American Express or anything are going to run through the income account every quarter. In fact, they run through it every day in this series, so that it really will get confusing. Now, it's our job to explain things so that you aren't confused when we report GAAP earnings. But GAAP earnings, as reported, will become even more meaningless looking only at the bottom line than they are now. And
that was not necessarily a good idea.
No, I think it's a terrible idea, but we'll deal with it. It's my job to explain to what extent GAAP accounting to you in evaluating Berkshire and the times when it actually distorts things. Accounting isn't supposed to it's not supposed to describe value. On the other hand, it's a terribly useful tool if understood in order to estimate value if you're analyzing businesses. And so in a certain way, you can't blame the auditing profession for doing what they think is their job, which is not to present value, although by using these market values.
But you can blame the audit profession.
What's that?
You can blame the audit profession for that one.
Yeah.
That was really stupid.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that, actually. But we will do our best to give you, always going to give you the audited figures, and then we're going to explain their shortcomings in either direction and what you should use and what you probably should ignore in looking at those numbers and using them to come to a judgment as to the value of your holdings. And I'll explain it to you the same way I would explain it to my sisters or anybody else. That we want you to understand what you own, and we try to cover the details that are really important in that respect. There's a million things you can talk about that are just of minor importance when you're talking about a $400 billion market value. But they're the things that if Charlie and I were talking about the company, they'd be the figures or the interpretations or anything that we would regard as important in sort of coming to an estimate of the value of the business. But it's going to be, you can't knock the media. They've only got a few paragraphs to describe the earnings of Berkshire every quarter. But if they simply look at bottom line numbers, what can be silly this year will become absolutely ludicrous next year because of the new rule that comes into effect for 2018. Okay, station 10.
Hello, Warren. This is a question from China. I'm James Chen, a pension fund manager from China, Shanghai. My question is quite simple. What is the probability of duplicating your great investment track record in China's stock market the next decade or two in terms of investment pursuit? That's all. And thanks my friends from Hui Tianfu and Fugo Fund Management House for guiding me in raising this question. Thank you.
Charlie, you're the expert on China.
It's like determining the order of presidency between allows them to flee. Yeah. I do think that the Chinese stock market is cheaper than the American market. And I do think China has a bright future. And I also think that there'll be growing pains, of course. But we have this opportunistic way of going through life. We don't have any particular rules about which market we're in or anything like that.
Well, Charlie's delivered a headline anyway now. Munger predicts China market will outperform U.S. So, and I've just been informed it's 12:15, so I apologize if you're hungry for holding you over for 15 minutes. So we'll reconvene around 1:15, and I'll see you then. Thanks.